Once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, a beautiful little girl was born on the planet known as Minnesota. This little girl was given the name Cadrian. Cadrian was smart, kind, and absolutely lovable. And quite frankly, she still is. Not long after, and not too far away, a little boy named Nicholas was born on the planet known as New Jersey. He was also very smart, kind, and absolutely lovable. And quite frankly, he still is. What neither of them knew as children is that the cosmos had a plan for them to come together and to be bound in love and marriage, which is why we are all gathered here today. But relationships are a story in themselves, and this is theirs. Both Nick and Cadrian were born to wonderful parents who loved them and have loved them from the very beginning, to whom we are all grateful. And both Nick and Cadrian were blessed with amazing brothers, for whom we are also grateful, as friends and family are one of the very best parts of life. At the same time, though not in the same place, both Cadrian and Nick were growing bigger and becoming even more beautiful people, discovering the world and finding what they loved. Legos, for example. Which makes sense, considering Legos are logical, yet artistic. Both Cadrian and Nick are logical, artistic people, so you can almost picture them sitting down in front of a pile of Legos, making a magical kingdom or futuristic spaceship. I personally like to imagine that on one particular day, at the exact same time, Nick and Cadrian set two little Lego people next to one another, smiled, and thus sealed their fate as a couple. And I like Legos as a metaphor. Each piece is part of the bigger whole, just as each loving moment is part of the whole relationship. They fuel our imaginations and take us to far-off worlds, which again is what life is all about, adventures and imagination. Speaking of which, both Nick and Cadrian made a lot of friends, being that they are so lovable. But Cadrian went the extra mile and made herself an imaginary friend named Jenai, who I'm told might be here today witnessing this moment. So if you see a dark-haired, mousy-looking girl, don't be alarmed. It's just Jenai, and she was invited and gives her blessing. And on that note, if you happen to stumble upon Nick's baby blanket, don't touch it. For apparently he hated it when people made his blanket too hot. Just a fun fact. But speaking of imagination and fabric, go with me for just a moment. Here, standing in this little meadow, is a handsome man dressed in a fine suit, and a beautiful woman dressed in a stunning wedding dress. But for a moment, let us use our imaginations and picture Nick as Cadrian as young adults. Nick would be standing here in jeans and a t-shirt with some metal band or monster on it. Which, if you know Nick, makes perfect sense. Cadrian would also be in jeans, covered in marker of her own design, and yellow boots, which, if you know Cadrian, makes perfect sense. And if these two young adults were standing here today, they'd still be smiling at one another, quickly falling in love, and perhaps leaning in to steal a kiss. Which is important to note, for while the trees and the water and the suits and the dresses and the people and the wine and the sky and the birds and the sea are all so beautiful, it is only the endless beauty of these two hearts and their love for one another that brings us to this moment. You can't hold it or touch it, but you can certainly feel it. You can truly feel the mighty love these two have for each other. If they were tossed into space, it would be the gravitational pull of their love that would inevitably bring them together. Which is perhaps one of the great schemes of the cosmos, bringing these two together. The cosmos brought Nick and Cadrian west to the fine city of San Francisco, which is, after all, a true city of romance. I, like many of us, was lucky enough to live with Nick. And to be honest, in many ways, he saved my life. From that moment I met him, I knew he was a special human being. And I knew he deserved someone special. I'm no soothsayer, so I did not know when or how she might present herself. But I knew she was out there, somewhere, bouncing around the city, unknowingly coming closer and closer to bumping into this fine man, and he to her. On October 13th, 2010, which was a Wednesday for anyone curious, both Nick and Cadrian found themselves at a little dive bar in the Lower Haight, a place called Molotov's. Perhaps not the finest cocktails or even the kindest patrons. But apparently the perfect spot to bump into your soulmate. Now use your imaginations again. There's Nick, standing taller and more handsome than all. He's 6'7" for anyone still curious. And there's Cadrian, more beautiful and more loving than all. I like to think that they must have been glowing, which brought their orbits closer and closer until they struck up a conversation, and thus struck up a relationship. They talked long into the night until finally they were forced to leave, at which point they found themselves on the sidewalk out front. And despite the foggy San Francisco weather, I like to imagine the moon was smiling down at them, and perhaps the man on the moon was crossing all his fingers. Whatever the case may be, fate had spoken. Cadrian, being not quite as tall as Nick, and yet masterfully clever, stepped Nick back offward the curb so she could see him eye to eye. And then she leaned in for the kiss. Perhaps that's also what sealed the deal. Nick, I can testify, was all grins for weeks. And Cadrian apparently called her mom to report meeting a good man. I talked with Candace, who says that from the way Cadrian spoke, she knew that this guy was going to be something serious. And Nick was serious about Cadrian, and Cadrian was serious about him, though she wasn't looking for, quote, anything serious. When asked about falling in love, she says with a smile, "I was duped. He came out of nowhere." But even she admits Nick was just what she was looking for, without actually looking. When I asked Nick about falling in love, he says that he had his life kind of worked out. Friends, a job, a house, a fun life, but there was a piece missing, and that piece was Cadrian. She's the Lego woman to his Lego man. And together they will build castles, sail pirate ships, and fly to far-off worlds in spaceships. While I am rather sentimental when it comes to love, I personally think it's fate that brings us here today. Nick, Cadrian, you've both made choices in your life to make this possible. You've chosen each other, and you've chosen wisely. You are both beautiful people inside and out, and you deserve one another. But I also think it's fate that brought you to this city, to each other, to that first kiss, to the big question, and now this absolutely beautiful wedding. You are surrounded by family and friends who love you, support you, and are so happy that you have come together. We are proud of you, and we shall support you in this union for the rest of our lives. Speaking of friendship, you are both extremely good friends, and all your friends love you wholeheartedly in return. But you're also best friends to one another. As you go forward in life, remember to always honor your friendship. Be playful, be helpful, and smile as much as possible. For as many of you know, for me, friendship is perhaps one of the best things in life. There are good ships, and there are wood ships, the ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are friendships. And may they always be.